What's up, everybody? Today we are distributing a negative number. A negative sign indicates the opposite of a number. So here's a list of opposites terms. So we have 8. What's the opposite of 8? It's negative 8. What's the opposite of negative 5? 5. What's the opposite of x? Negative x. What's the opposite of negative 3x? 3x. What's the opposite of 1? Negative 1. And what's the opposite of negative 9x? It's 9. So whatever the number is, if it's positive, it ends up negative. And if the number is negative, it ends up positive. So when we're distributing a negative number, you are multiplying each term within the parentheses by the negative number outside the parentheses. This results in the finding of the opposite of each term within the parentheses. So for example, negative 3 being distributed to 2 and positive 4x. Well, negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. And then negative 3 times 4 is negative 12x. And I think that one of the most important things to remember here is your integer rule. So when you're multiplying and dividing integers, if the signs are the same, the answer is positive. So a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. And the same goes for division. Remember that if you're multiplying and dividing integers with different signs, like a positive times a negative, it's a negative, and the same can be thought of in the reverse way. A negative times a positive is also a negative, and the same works for division. So your rules are really important to remember. If the signs are the same when you're multiplying, it ends up positive, and if the signs are different, it ends up as a negative. So let's take a look at your first example right here. We have number 1 saying negative 2 being distributed to g plus 5. So I have negative 2 being distributed to g plus 5. And one of the things to remember is that if you have a variable, that there's a 1 in front of your variable. All right? So when I'm going to be distributing negative 2, I'm going to be doing negative 2 times 1. And they have different signs. So I end up with a negative. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. And then I have negative 2 times 5. They're different signs. So I end up with a negative, which is negative 2 times 5 is 10. And remember, always include your variable in your answer. For number 2, I have negative 2 being distributed to a negative g plus 5. And remember that there is actually a 1 in front of this. So it's a negative 1, right? So I have a negative times a negative. So a negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm going to have a positive 2g. And then I have a negative times a positive. So I have a negative 5. I'm sorry, a negative 10. In number 3's example, I have negative 2 being distributed to a positive g and a negative 5. So I'm going to take my negative 2 and deposit it and distribute it to a positive. So I have negative 2 times positive g, right? A negative times a positive is a negative. They have different signs. I have a negative and a positive. So I have negative 2g. And then I have negative 2 times negative 5, and they have the same sign. So I have a positive 10. For number 4, I have negative 2 being distributed to negative g and negative 5. So I have a negative times a negative. So I'm going to have a positive. And then I have a negative times a negative. And I'm also going to have a positive. 2 times 5 is 10. Or negative, really, negative 2 times negative 5 is 10. So on the bottom here, you can just mirror what I did in 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I want you to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then what do we notice about questions 1 through 4 above? It says in each set of negative numbers, the value changed the signs of the terms inside the parentheses. All right? So then what mistakes might we make when distributing a negative? And this is a very common mistake, is that the second number inside the parentheses is its own term with its own value, that the second term is a positive or a negative. So for example, what they're talking about there is that second term in yellow has its own value. Okay, so each one of these, for example, is a -5, not -5. This is a +5, not just +5. Okay, so here's what we're talking about, the mistakes that people often make. All right, so on the bottom here, I want you guys to do 9, 10, 12, and 14. Okay, and I'm just going to show you one more time for number 13. All right, I have -3 being distributed to -p, or -1p plus 7. So I have a negative times a negative. They have the same signs. So that is going to end up being a positive 3p. And then I have a negative times a positive, which means that it ends up being negative. So I have -21. All right, that is it for today. You don't have to do anything from the bottom, just the top. So I need you to do 9, 10, 12, and 14, and 5, 6, 7, and 8. Everybody have a great day and stay safe.